All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. Welcome back, focused learners. Today, we're unpacking something absolutely fascinating and honestly, kind of deeply personal to all of us. We're exploring the profound friction that exists inside our own minds. I mean, think about those moments when you're just sitting quietly on the couch. You're physically resting, right? Yet your mind is racing with guilt, anxiety, or this desperate need to be productive. That internal clash, that is exactly what we're mapping out today. We're going to examine the paradoxes of the self, how we build these incredibly elaborate defenses against our own realities, and ultimately, why we so fiercely resist the exact peace we claim to be looking for. It's really a journey into the architecture of our own internal contradictions.
So, have you ever found yourself in a situation where you just muttered, "So what?" or "big deal," or "who cares?" just to protect yourself? Yeah, we've all done it. We use this really casual, intellectual shrug to signal to the world, and let's be real, to ourselves, that we are totally unbothered. But why do we actually do this? Well, we do it because truly caring is an act of deep vulnerability. If we genuinely care about an outcome, a relationship, or a goal, we open ourselves up to the very real possibility of being let down. So, we resist. We put up this massive wall of apathy. But here's the hook. Pretending not to care is incredibly hard work. This apathy you're projecting, it's not freedom. It's an exhausting, full-time performance.
Section 1. The Armor of Indifference. Let's peel back the first layer of this resistance.
Consider this concept called the load-bearing shrug. When you dismiss something with a quick, "so what?" you are actively performing indifference. Think about actual load-bearing walls in a house. They are under constant, immense pressure, right? They're holding up the entire structural weight of the building, day and night. Well, that is exactly what you're doing to your psyche. It takes a massive amount of caloric and emotional energy to constantly scan your environment for threats of disappointment and then frantically build a wall of "I don't care" before it hits you. A truly free person doesn't need to loudly and constantly announce to the room how unbothered they are. If your defense has to advertise itself, it's not a release. It's a load-bearing wall holding up a fragile ego.
And this brings us to a stark contrast between simply numbing out and actually waking up. On one hand, we have anesthesia. That's the load-bearing shrug. It acts like emotional Novocaine. It converts raw, vital pain into this flat, manageable numbness, which keeps the unpredictability of the world at a very safe distance. But on the other hand, enlightenment, or just genuine presence, is entirely different. It's quiet. It's an unannounced participation in reality. You know, when you are truly present, you aren't broadcasting your chillness to everybody in the room. You're just in the room. You are experiencing the moment without the exhausting need to manage how your detachment is being perceived. True peace doesn't need a PR campaign, you know?
Section 2. The Dukkha Pattern. Now let's look at the underlying psychological loop fueling this.
So there's this cycle of perpetual thirst, known as the Dukkha pattern. It's got two sides. First, we have want other. This is our mind's restless craving for an absent reality, maybe a different version of now or a completely romanticized past. Then we have neglect have. This is the active ignoring of the abundance already in our hands. Basically, we maintain a self-identity of lack. And this is absolutely vital to understand. We literally choose the story of our own dissatisfaction over the reality of our possession. Why? Because being a seeker is incredibly comforting to the ego. It gives us a perpetual mission. If you're always seeking, you never have to do the terrifying work of just being. Admitting you have enough means the search is over, and for the ego, that feels like a terrifying loss of purpose.
To make this a bit more concrete, imagine the absolute tragedy of the banana in the bag. Picture this. You're frantically searching your backpack for a snack, growing more and more frustrated and hungry, all while completely ignoring the perfectly ripe banana you already packed at the very bottom. We do this with our lives every single day. We search for happiness or fulfillment somewhere else because looking directly at the perfectly good fruit we already have just feels too real. Admitting you have enough right now removes your fundamental right to be disappointed. And oddly enough, we cling to our disappointment as a familiar, safe defense mechanism. It's wild, right?
Section 3. The Thinking Contradiction. Let's get into our first major paradox here.
We wage this insane internal civil war. We realize our resistance is exhausting, so what do? We try to fix it. We try to force ourselves to be effortless. But here is the paradox. We are trying to use the thinking mind, the intellect, to issue executive orders to the body to just let go. But the intellect is an analytical tool. It's built for grasping, controlling, and categorizing. It is fundamentally the wrong tool for the job of letting go. Honestly, it's like trying to put out a fire by throwing a calculator at it. Trying to force yourself into a state of non-action is, by its very definition, an act of supreme effort. You just get trapped in this endless loop of self-improvement that creates infinitely more friction.
Think of conventional effort like nailing your feet to the bank of a river while trying to force your way downstream. It's utterly exhausting. You are fighting the current while literally tethered to the shore. But Wu Wei, the ancient Taoist concept of effortless action, is about releasing the bank and following the natural grain of the water. When we try to command ourselves to achieve Wu Wei using our rigid intellect, we are essentially trying to break physics by obeying physics. We're hacking against the bone of reality instead of just finding the natural hollows and letting the current carry us smoothly.
And all of this creates an infinite regress. It's a classic Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. We walk around saying things like, I want to stop wanting, which, okay, sounds like a highly mature, enlightened goal, right? But the moment you add the phrase, including anything, the desire becomes completely self-consuming. The desire to end all desires is itself a massive, clenching desire. You are desperately grasping at non-grasping. You simply cannot use the instrument of desire to extinguish desire. It doesn't work. It just feeds the snake another inch of its own tail.
Section 4. The Observer's Paradox. This is where we hit the existential root of the problem.
I want you to let this quote sink in for a moment. The glass isn't between you and the other, the glass is between you and you. The core issue here is that the mind is trying to analyze the very tool it uses for analysis. You just cannot step outside of your own subjectivity. You can't nullify the nullifier. The observer is like a pin trying to tack itself to a corkboard. Every single time you push the pin, you just push the board further away.
Ancient mythology actually understood this perfectly. Take the parable of Hundun, the faceless emperor of primordial chaos. Hundun was completely whole, deeply generous, and happily existed in a state of natural flow. But then, these well-meaning emperors from neighboring lands decided they needed to help Hundun. They thought it was tragic that he didn't have eyes to see or ears to hear or a mouth to categorize the world like they did. So every day for 7 days, they drilled a hole into him. On the 7th day, Hundun died. This isn't just some quirky myth. It is a really profound warning about the violence of over-analysis. When we relentlessly drill holes into our own raw, chaotic, vital experience, constantly judging, measuring, and dissecting every emotion to see if we are doing it right, we don't improve ourselves. We slowly kill our natural spontaneity. We literally murder the very life force we are trying to understand.
Section 5. The Art of Effortless Action.
So how do we finally drop the armor?
Here's the secret. True Wu Wei is not a wantless flat line. That is the state of a corpse, not a sage. The ancient sages still got hungry, they still delighted in fish, they still felt the entire spectrum of human want. But they engaged in wanting without clenching. Think about the legendary Taoist story of Butcher Ding. He was tasked with carving oxen for the ruler, and his knife never dulled in 19 years. How is that even possible? Because he didn't hack against the bone. He didn't use brute force to chop through the resistance of the joint. Instead, he paid exquisite attention to the natural anatomy, and he simply guided his impossibly thin blade through the empty spaces between the joints. The carcass just fell apart with a whisper. He participated fully in the act, but completely without the friction of forcing his will upon reality.
This kind of ultimate release? It isn't logical. It's somatic. The body literally takes over. Look at the poem's self-isolation that we analyzed in our sources. The speaker spends stanza after stanza trying to reason their way into Wu Wei, trying to somehow outsmart their own anxiety, and they fail completely. As the intellectual frustration mounts, the physical text of the poem shrinks, it stutters, and finally, it completely short-circuits on a single involuntary word: funny. That laugh isn't a philosophical conclusion drawn from some mental spreadsheet of pros and cons. No, it is an involuntary physical release. It's the mind finally realizing the absolute absurdity of trying to control every variable of reality and just surrendering. The mind breaks, the body laughs. And in that sudden, unscripted moment of letting go, the laugh itself is the Wu Wei. You cannot think your way out of overthinking. You can only drop the act.
So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. We spend so much energy on that load-bearing shrug, performing our indifference and fiercely wanting what is absent. But what happens if you actually drop the commentary? I want you to ask yourself the honest why. What is one thing directly in front of you, right now, that you have been neglecting to simply have, just because looking at it too closely might mean you already have enough? Thank you for exploring this explainer with me today. Drop the armor and go participate in your reality.